To start closing out our day, we do have a very special guest. Welcome Dr. Andy Jarvis from the Bezos Earth Fund. Andy, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Andy, we're very appreciative for you staying up late for us. It is currently past midnight for Andy. He's beaming in from Colombia for this fireside chat. So I think the metaphorical fireplace between us is somewhere in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean. And Andy, by way of introduction, has spent over 20 years working to advance food security and environmental sustainability. He joined the Bezos Earth Fund from the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIART as the Associate Director for Research Strategy and Innovation. He's overseen research spanning from crop breeding and genetics to landscape management, climate adaptation and mitigation through to dietary shifts and consumer behaviour. Andy now leads the Bezos Earth Fund's Future Food Program, which is focused on the question, how do we nourish 10 billion people with less land and fewer emissions? Andy, you've got $1 billion to spend on answering that question by 2030. That's a big chunk of change to deploy. And we'll get into it in a moment, how you're planning to spend it. But let's just start with the big picture. Why food? And what is the Bezos Earth Fund's theory of change when it comes to food systems?
Great. No, hi everyone. And first of all, just apologies that I can't be there with you in that great meeting room. I guess there was a family commitment. I had to stay here. But what I will say is the one benefit is it's not my phone that's lost there. So at least that's one benefit of not being there. So it's great to be talking to you lot. So yeah, first of all, it's terrifying. We have a $1 billion commitment on food. It's terrifying because we are facing a nature crisis, a climate crisis, enormous challenges around the world. We really need to make every dollar count right now in terms of, delivering much needed solutions. So why food? Well, I'll just start with that. That's an easy one. And I actually find it kind of crazy that the world really is only just waking up to the fact that we can't solve the nature crisis and we can't solve the climate crisis without looking at food. It's 1/3 of global emissions, 2/3 of ice-free land across the planet is being used for our food system. To put it kind of, simply, yes, we can do all of the energy transition in the world. We can go electric cars around the world. We still won't reach the Paris Agreement unless we transform our food system. So that's why we have this commitment on food. It is, absolutely critical in the global system. When it comes to thinking about food, then we take it one step further. We can't fix climate and we can't fix nature without food. We can't fix the food system without looking at protein. And so that's been the vast majority of our initial attention over the last 2 years has been this area of sustainable protein. And that's because, well, I said 1/3 of global emissions is for food. Well, half of that is coming from animals. 2/3 of ice-free land is being used for our food system. Well, 80% of that is for animal source food. So this is the first port of call that we've got to look at. And so it's been the primary goal of ours over these last 2 years for a lot of our grant making.
Fantastic. And I know you guys are taking quite a systems-wide approach. There's a real grounding in evidence and a recognition that food systems are extremely complex and there's no silver bullet. And so you're looking at everything from traditional land-based agriculture, grazing practices, for example, all the way through to alternative proteins, cellular technologies, consumer research even. Can you talk a bit more about how you go about approaching that sustainable protein grant-making program? And what is the ROI, I guess, that you're wanting to see? What is success in that area?
Yeah, the beauty of the food system is its diversity, right? You have 8 billion consumers around the world, 10 billion shortly. You have enormous diversity in religions, in budgets, in cultures, in values, in tastes, all of these kinds of things. And it's very different to energy. Energy is a quite simple solution. We just need to move off fossil fuel generation of energy into renewables, right? And for the 8 billion consumers out there, well, not all of them have access to electricity, but those that have access to electricity, it doesn't matter. You flick the switch, if it goes on, it's not really, whether it's coming from renewable or fossil fuel is not necessarily such an issue. Food is a lot more personal. It's a lot more, it's something that goes deep into our culture. And so we have to be respectful of that. And so we've taken this kind of what we call the yes and approach to things. And it's recognizing that we need 1,000 flowers to bloom. I mean, there is no silver bullet in this. There are lots of solutions that all need to get working, all together, right? And I think we've got to get off kind of being quite religious or fanatical about this is the solution or that's the solution. It's multiple solutions. So our approach to sustainable protein is very much in the vein of that. We actually do stuff on livestock. How can we reduce emissions? How can we reduce the methane side of things? How can we get deforestation out of supply chains and value chains? And recognizing that, for the decades to come, livestock is an enormous enterprise that we need to tackle. So yes, we need that, and we need alternatives. And so that's our work on the alternative protein side. The ROI on the alternative protein side really is market share. You have these ridiculous numbers. I mean, I already said it's 1/3 of emissions, 2/3 of ice-free land, large portion of that coming from animal source foods. Well, we've got demand going to increase by 50% for those animal source foods. There is simply no planet left. There is no carbon budget left if that is delivered with conventional animal source foods. So we see it's an imperative. Alternative proteins have to survive. They have to basically take that market share. So that's our ROI. How do we get that market share?
Yeah, fantastic. And I know from what I understand, your major focus at the moment is open source R&D, and you've got these 3 centers you've announced so far in the sustainable protein space, the most recent in Singapore. Can you tell us a bit more about those initiatives and how they will operate?
Yeah, I mean, when we were looking at this kind of topic of alternative protein, it was a tough one because the initial reaction was, well, the private sector's dealing with that. You've got enormous amounts of venture capital going in, lots of companies developing products. What's the role of philanthropy there? And so that was the question we kept asking ourselves. And in consulting with many of our partners who've been very close, also with the Good Food Institute, who've been helping us as strategic partners on this. And we kind of came to the conclusion, well, unlike many other sectors, the old protein world missed a beat. It went straight into this venture capital world. Lots of companies developing products, lots of companies investing much needed capital in R&D just to have the basic elements of what would be a product. And that's not actually efficient in the long run. There is an enormous amount of duplicity across the sector, across companies. So we thought, okay, let's just go back to basics a little bit. How do we create a much stronger base for this? So these centers are really looking at that foundation, the foundational R&D that is going to help us basically get the price down, that is going to boost the taste, the texture, the mouthfeel, the consumer acceptance, and do that in a way that is not using salts and sugars and fats to do the heavy lifting, so that we actually have products that are also healthy and with minimal processing. So I think that it's going back to basics. What are the drivers right now that are causing those prices? Where are we failing to get the tastes right? Where are we over processing or producing products that don't necessarily have the nutritional quality that we need? How can we go back to basics? What R&D is going to fix that? So that's what these centers, we have 3 of them. One's in NC State in the US, one is in Imperial, one is in Singapore. Each of them are taking kind of a different flavor, different focus, but they're designed to be demand driven. It's the sector saying, look, these are some of the problems that we're facing. And can we move that kind of pre-competitive line a little bit further along so that the next generation of companies are not spending so much of that hard-earned capital that they have on this, the basic foundational stuff, they're moving quicker to getting a product in front of consumers.
Yeah, fantastic. And it really echoes this sentiment that we've heard today about a rising tide lifts all ships and the need for pushing out that pre-competitive stage because we're trying to solve the same challenges in just sort of, getting off of the ground. How does a company in the room today go about leveraging the research that's going to come out of these centres? You said it's open source. What does that look like?
I mean, I guess there's two ways. One is the more passive way is just help us by saying, look, these are the problems we're facing. This is what we need. We need the centers to be responding to the demands that are coming from across the sector. So, one is in that vein. The second is actually plug into these centers, and we have. Beyond priority setting and trying to get some of the problems you're facing up on the research agenda, co-invest in with these centers, and what you have is access. We have $90 million across these three centers now deployed. Enormous capacity on the research side. Some of the best researchers around the world working on this, and we can do research projects together. So if there are specific topics where you're really struggling with, instead of going alone, go with a center. Work collaboratively, and let's overcome some of these things. So these centers are just getting going. They're only just a few months old. Many of them are setting up, staffing up, getting directors in place, setting up the governance arrangements and the means of actually listening, and the ecosystem of partners and all of these kinds of things. So it's early in their journey, but now's the time to reach out and start having those conversations and setting their agenda.
How exciting. Most folks in the room today are based in the Asia Pacific region. That's where their businesses operate. Can you speak a bit about how the Bezos Earth Fund views the APAC region in terms of this protein transition?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely critical. I mean, if you look at the numbers, I'm quite, the kind of the cynic in me is that so much of the development of alternative proteins has been in kind of the wrong countries for the wrong reasons to a certain extent. I mean, you look at where this has been most successful is in places like Singapore and Denmark, in Israel, and they're countries without huge amounts of land where there is a reason to develop these, and from a kind of food sovereignty perspective, from an innovation and tech kind of leadership perspective, which is great. But it doesn't matter in those countries if every consumer switches 100% to alternative proteins. It makes no difference on the planet. What really makes a difference on the planet is many of those countries in the APAC region, which are Indonesia, China, India. Just with those three, that's where an enormous chunk of the growth in demand for animal source foods is coming from. So just in Southeast Asia and East Asia, you have 2.3 billion consumers. And that's what's going to basically define the future, is what those consumers are eating in 20 years' time. And it's also where the biggest dynamics in terms of growing middle class, which is the primary driver of animal source food demand. So yeah, I mean, APAC is absolutely critical. That's where we've squarely got our eyes on in terms of getting products in front of consumers.
Do you think there are unique challenges that come with trying to influence consumers in the APAC region? We know it's such an incredibly diverse region. Even within a single country, there's great diversity in terms of consumers. But as a region that, on one hand, has a long-standing tradition of alternative protein consumption, tofu and tempeh and insects in some parts, but this perception that those are the less desirable forms of protein, and maybe they're the poor man's protein, maybe they're not, as aspirational as the kinds of protein that the West are eating, and that those that have more disposable income in the APAC region are looking to consume more of the time. What do you think that presents for companies trying to break through in these markets in terms of, quite a different set of consumer attitudes and cultural history compared with the West?
Yeah. I mean, on the face of it, I think it's easier. I mean, talk about taking the hardest of all of the challenges, trying to, convince a Texan to eat a plant-based burger, right? That's what, most of the sector, it was kind of born out of almost taking on the hardest food, and the hardest kind of consumer kind of culture, and trying to switch something out there. And in Asia, it's very different. I mean, you don't have a plate of food where the steak is the headline, headline act on it, right? You have across Asia much more diverse plates of food, much more where the animal source protein, as important as it is on that plate, it's not necessarily the absolute headline act, right? I always use an example, Vietnam. You have pho, for example, a beef pho. It's so many more things than the piece of beef that are in that soup and the noodles, right? So I mean, I think actually it's, in many of these dishes, there is a much easier or lower bar in terms of what you have to have in terms of a product that's going to be acceptable for consumers. Yes, you have to do the work on the marketing and things to make it sexy and make it exciting, right? But I found it quite funny, and we were checking out Thailand and thinking about, what would alternative proteins, you know, um, look like in Thailand. And and there was it was kind of among the youth and the kind of growing middle class. It was kind of cool to be vegan and vegetarian, and it was kind of being positioned there as a thing like that's a little bit different, a little bit edgy if you're a vegan or a vegetarian. So, I think that's how we've got to think about this as well, is make it not necessarily a kind of a poor man's or a poor woman's piece of protein that's replacing tofu or tempeh or anything like that, but actually something that's cool. It's like, oh, this. If you've actually got disposable income, you go out and seek this. I think that's where you've got to get to.
I'm curious, if we sort of stand back and look at the big picture, cast our minds forward 25 years, where do you see the sustainable protein landscape, or where do you hope to see it rather? And what do you think are the fundamental levers that need to be pulled in order to get us there? Do you have any calls to action for people in the room?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, just like I can just outline why we are so committed on this, and why we have well, now deployed all of this money already in these three centers. And it's a few proof points that I had. When I took on the job, I spent about a year going around, and I sampled, ate so many different alternative proteins from different parts of the world. Some were plant-based, fermented, cultivated, different, chicken, beef, seafood, all of these things. And to be honest, I tried, a few that were pretty revolting, and I tried a few that were absolutely incredible. And those ones that I tried that were incredible, I'll use an example with cheese. I'm a big cheese eater. I would find it very hard to not eat cheese. And I was kind of immediately very skeptical. It's like, come on, you're not going to be able to like do this, like a really good piece of cheese with, plant-based. And no, I tried a cheese that I tried it, and I looked at the guy and I was like, come on, you just went to the shop and you just bought a blue cheese, and this is a scam. I wanted to do, some analysis on it. But, I've had that proof point now over these last 2 years, where you see, wait a minute, these products can absolutely hit taste parity. And that's the proof point. That's why we're convinced, So then it's just a journey. It's just like, we use the example of solar panels. Jimmy Carter in 1979 put some solar panels on the roof of the White House. They were very expensive. They were incredibly inefficient. And they were very early in the journey, but it was visionary in the sense of, showing this is the way we've got to go. And I think it's very much the same with alternative proteins right now. We're early in the journey, and very little money has been spent really in the grand scheme of things on the alternative protein industry. And I have no doubt that in 20 years' time, these products will be highly, highly appreciated by consumers and taking market share. What needs to happen? Well, price needs to go down, the taste needs to get better, And I think we need to tell a very strong and good story about the health benefits of it. The call to action on this is primarily to governments: invest, right? You need to support this. The kind of the counterfactual on this is right now in subsidies to animal source foods, there's hundreds of billions every year being spent in terms of support that governments are providing subsidies to the livestock industry, right? If in all time, different kind of numbers get thrown around, 13, 16, 17 billion dollars in alternative proteins in all of time, that gets spent in 3 weeks on animal source foods around the world, right? I mean, you have to give this a chance. I think governments need to invest. And they need to invest, we look at it from a sustainability angle, others could look at it from a health angle, but they need to invest because this is an economic opportunity. This is a new industry, and just like solar panels right now is an enormous sector. Renewable energy is the place to be right now. Alternative proteins, I believe, also is going to be the place to be. So I think, the first biggest call to action that we have is for governments to invest. We're a drop in the ocean in terms of the money, but what we want to use is our philanthropic dollars to send a very strong signal. That this is a sector of the future, that this is a sector that requires government support. So it's money investing, but it's also the policies, the programs take away all the barriers that exist right now and start creating an enabling environment for this to succeed.
Well said. We're just going to close with one or two questions. And the first that I'm seeing up here is there any budget or investment being considered for marketing and advertising for the AltProtein sector?
I mean, I think, that goes back to this question of, well, what's the role of philanthropy? I mean, I think, the way we see it is with our grants and our money, it's about helping get the products kind of have companies with the tools and the knowledge, the know-how, the R&D, all of this to make better products. And that R&D that you're spending right now, spend it on marketing and get it out there. I don't think it's not an easy sell for philanthropy to be paying that money for the marketing side of things. What we do have in some of the centers is just building the evidence, though, so that you can market these products. So have the numbers, so there's stuff on clinical trials, for example, about the health benefits of eating alternative proteins versus animal source foods. So some of the evidence that then you can use as arguments on the marketing side.
Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate you taking the time at 1 a.m. in Colombia to speak with us, and we will be watching this space with great interest. Please join me in thanking Andy Jarvis.
Thanks a lot.